Hello and welcome to The Stack, and what a packed show it is. We speak with Cathy Olmedillas, founder of beautiful children's title Anorak, on her new food title for kids, plus a new publisher that focuses on out-of-print books that are deeply inspired by a building or a landmark. And finally, Xavier Encinas from biannual print publication 16 World. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. And with pleasure, we welcome back on The Stack Cathy Olmedillas, founder of Studio Anorak, an independent children's publishing house that publishes Anorak, of course, Dot, and now they have a new title, Chew, self-described as the yummy mag for kids. The first issue is all about oranges. To tell me all about it, Cathy joined us in the studio to discuss children magazines and her love for ice cream.
I always try to find subjects and themes that are relevant to a child without going too much into politics or be too affected by the gloom and doom that's around us. And peace for me came to me a few months ago, really, and I just thought, what is missing at the moment? Why are we all so super anxious? Why is this constant cycle of news making us feel that way? And I think the difference between when I was growing up and when children are growing up now is that they probably see those news. When I was a kid, I didn't see those news, right? We didn't have the internet or anything like that. So I was kind of protected. And it just made me think about that. It made me think about what do children have, which is a space which is safe and we can discuss really big topics like peace and make them realize that, actually there are a lot of positive and peaceful things happening in the world, but they're just obviously overtaken by the doom and gloom and, all the horrible stuff that goes on in the world. So it was a delicate balance that I wanted to achieve with this, because obviously, I don't want to be like, hey, everything is super great. We live in this wonderful world, when we know we don't. But I just want to, in our own humble way, to give children an opportunity to reflect and just take some time. And if they are also bombarded by news, how do we all together, families, people, any adults, teenagers, children, how do we keep peace within and peace around us? So I love, as you can tell, I can't stop talking about it, but I absolutely love dealing with huge subjects like this and then making them kid-friendly. I love it.
And you made it very successfully. And I have to say, I love your usage of color. This is so important as well, because it's definitely not minimalist here.
No.
It's maximalist, if I may say, right?
Yes, it is. People always ask me, what are the theories behind your color scheme? And all I can say is that it's the question of taste. And I was very lucky to have been brought up in different countries when I was a child. And those countries had color at the core of everything. And I think while I dress all in black, usually in my head, this is the world that inhabits my head. So I'm obsessed with colors. But I also think because as a child, you absorb colors so much. The whole world is vivid around you. And I think for me, that's what childhood represents. And that's what I wanted with Anorak too. I'm afraid it's never going to be minimalist. And I have an actual little fear of the white page.
There's no white pages here.
There is a little bit, but not too much, right?
At the end, there was something about coloring. Yeah. So you should add your own color there, right?
Exactly.
And let's talk about, and of course, we had the launch of Dot. But even Dot, what's the issue? Is it issue 35?
Yes, 36. Yes.
Fantastic.
So it's going to be 10 years old this year, actually. 2015 is when we launched Dot, which is the same as Anorak, but fundamentally for younger children, for preschoolers.
And there's a third one that I have here in front of me, which is Chew, which is the yummy mag for kids. So basically, it's from the same spirit of Dot and Anorak, but now it's focusing on food. So tell us about where did you came up with this idea? And I have to say, Cathy, the market for food magazines is incredible. So it's very good that we have one out that is actually for kids.
Right. Interesting. So, yes, so this is our new baby paper magazine. And I launched it on a whim, really, in November last year. I had been thinking about launching a third magazine, even though when people asked me, I was like, no, I'm focusing on Anorak and Dot. That's enough. And I thought, actually, food is such a universal subject, but also it feels, without being, again, too political or too on my soapbox, it feels like we increasingly disconnected from the source of food, from the magic of every single ingredient that we have at our disposal. And I only deal with kids' magazines. I know the kids' publishing world. I don't really look at the mainstream magazine world. So for me, it was obvious that I wanted to launch something that was for kids, but related to food. And as I started thinking about this, I started thinking I will approach it exactly the same way as with Anorak. So it's a quarterly, it has a theme every edition. And I thought, if I choose a theme of a specific ingredient, like, for example, the first issue, it's oranges, will I have enough to write about on oranges, because oranges is just this kind of humble fruit. And I discovered a trove, I discovered a history, I discovered a heritage, I discovered a story of trade, and I discovered so many things that, in fact, one issue is probably not enough. And this is always the principle that we have with Anorak Dot and now Chew, is, we look at everything in the world with awe and wonder. And actually something that's really simple is very rich in information, in knowledge. And I hope that by doing that, children look at an orange or look at peace in a different way and appreciate it more. Because if you understand the history of how oranges are ending up on our plates, I'm sure you will want an orange instead of maybe an ice cream. Although that's still debatable, but
listen,
we can hope.
I am a very pro-orange person, I have to say. And even I discovered some information. I have no idea that apparently the first country that started planting oranges is China.
Correct. Yes.
I thought it was actually probably somewhere in South America. I need to read up a little bit more on Chew, actually.
Yes, and I think these are the things that interest me the most. We have preconceptions about how things end up on our plates, as I said. And for me, it's really interesting to dig and dig and dig to actually find the source of things, because we live in a global world, but we have, again, this very tunnel vision. We think oranges come from Florida or maybe South America, but actually oranges have been around for a very, very long time, and they came from China. And then again, those oranges tell you the story of the trade and how they ended up either in South America or in America. So for me, it's again going back to this idea that a very simple subject and a very simple ingredient has such richness behind it.
And I have a question for you, Cathy. We're seeing many countries, including mine, Brazil as well, where, governments are starting to ban mobiles at schools. There's been more concern with that. But you were there ahead of the time. I mean, do you think your magazines are good for parents as well to, not necessarily forbidding kids to use their mobiles, but to move them to something that tangible, that they can touch, something a little bit different than just the online world that we live in?
Yes, absolutely. And that has been a complete change in terms of the last 18 years of publishing, because when we first started publishing Anorak 18 years ago, the reason I launched it is because I could not find a magazine that I wanted to read with my child. So the magazines were like Barbie Weekly, Batman Monthly, no offense to any of those brands, by the way. But you know what I mean? They were always attached to a character. They were very flimsy. This is the reason why I launched Anorak in the first place. However, over the last 18 years, social media, the internet, mobile phones, smartphones, all of that has taken over. Screen culture has become a thing for not only us adults, but also for children. And increasingly, and I think the success of our magazines in the last 4 or 5 years has been down to not just the creativity, not just, a space for children to explore their imagination, but also as a thing against screen culture. So parents will use Anorak as the kind of immersive content, I hate this word, but, the immersive thing activity that children can do away from their smartphones. So that's been a new thing. So to me, it's amazing. It's credit to us lasting. I think that's the main thing. Sometimes you can launch something and then just it disappears. And for me, actually, every year, every now almost 2 decades of doing this, we seem to have a renewed raison d'être, I would say.
Fantastic. And I noticed as well that the magazines encourage kids to be out there making a cake, doing something, wearing a mask. So sure, they're reading the magazine, but then it kind of inspires them to do things in the real world as well.
Yes, absolutely. And that's really important. There's nothing like, making a cake, baking a cake with your family, creating a rocket.
I might try this orange cake.
Try it. It's good. I tried it.
I love oranges.
Yeah, it's just, for me, it's really important. It's not just feeding the brain, but also it's feeding their creativity. And also, it's important, obviously, from an imagination point of view, from an educational point of view, but also it's important from a mental health point of view. We see so many terrible stats about children and mental health, and I completely understand, because smartphones and everything else tend to make us into a particular kind of person and overuse our brains sometimes, I think. And I think going back to having some physical activity to do takes us away from this mad overthinking that we do by scrolling, by watching lots of YouTube videos and all that stuff. So, it's funny because it feels very old-fashioned for me to speak that way, but actually it's also very new in a sense because people increasingly want to turn towards things that are more tangible rather than another bit of digital content.
I want to talk about food still with you because I saw on your social media profile that you are a wannabe ice cream influencer. And I think this is brilliant because I'm a big fan of ice cream. So
oh my God. Yeah.
I presume you are as well, right?
Yes, I absolutely love them. But again, I love the taste, but I also love the history and the folklore around ice cream, she says, as a way to kind of justify the fact that I might eat one a week now. I used to do one a day, but I've stopped now.
I used to do one a day as well.
Yeah,
I stopped.
it's fabulous. I love it.
Yeah.
It's the best taste. It's just every ice cream tells a story. And, some are super sugary, some are not. And then if you travel around the world, you will find all sorts of different tastes. My favorite one at the moment is black sesame ice cream, which I have been very lucky to try in Seoul, in Korea, in November. But the UK has some great ice cream makers too. So I'm a wannabe ice cream maker. I think once the publishing world has had enough of me, maybe I can just launch myself into that.
If I may ask, what is one of your favorites in London? Because you did say that it's kind of near Marylebone.
Yes,
I'm very curious.
Yes, it is. So I'm sorry about all the other ice cream makers, which I love so dearly. But my favorite one is Festock London, which is just not very far from the Wallace collection. So just round the corner from you. And Festock London is a Lebanese ice cream maker, and they make ice cream with a thing called mastic, which is it makes the ice cream like a glue. It sounds horrible, but it's delicious. And it just makes it really chewy. And then they basically put the ice cream in the scoop into crushed pistachios. So you're eating this delicious ice cream, and then all around it is crushed pistachios. It's divine.
Well, you actually need to launch a podcast about ice cream. But again, this could be another one of your ventures. I mean, what about issue 2? Do you know already which food item?
Yes.
Is it a spoiler? Can you reveal it?
No, I can reveal it. It's fine. Basically, the second edition of 2, the theme will be bread.
Great.
All sorts of bread. So flour, the history of how flour, again, trading in flour, and also, how bread is made, and all sorts of different breads from all over the world. So, yeah, I'm excited.
Well, there is actually, at one time I've tried, I think it was in Paris, something with orange, but in bread. Oh my God, what's the name? Anyway, it was combining orange and bread together.
Is it fougasse?
Something like that.
Yeah,
I might have to leave the question mark here. But, oh, what a fantastic. So, Cathy, are you optimistic then by 2025?
Well, as far as publishing and as far as our little business is going, 100% optimistic. We now have a Korean edition of Anorak, and we are testing editions in China, which is super exciting. So our little world, I'm very optimistic. The rest of the world, Well, we shall see, right? I shall give you a shoulder shrug, which you can't see. And I think that's the way I kind of deal with things, is while I'm interested in what's happening across the world, obviously around the world, I'm trying to focus on our little island of children's publishing.
And finally, in Korea, I'm very curious now, are you heavily involved with that edition? Do they have any extra content there, or how does it work? Or is it kind of a translation of the English edition?
It's purely translated. So it's translated for the Korean market with a publisher called UX Review. And they take it exactly as it is, and then they publish it exactly as it is. They just translate it, and it's doing really, really well, which is incredible. And I love Korea. So this was like a dream come true for me to see it translated in Korean.
Thank you very much, Cathy. The first issue of Chew is out now. For all their other publications, check them out on anorakmagazine.com. And from a publisher to another, Rebeka Russell from Manderley Press. Manderley Press, named after the house in Daphne du Maurier's, Rebeka focuses on out-of-print books that are deeply inspired by a building, city, or landmark, with beautiful covers. She joined me in the studio to talk about some of her upcoming publications, such as Henry James' Washington Square and Mary Shelley in Bath. Here is Rebeka with more.
It sort of brings together all the interests I've had in my life. And people often ask about the name. And if you've read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, then you know that Manderley is the name of the house where she sets her story. It's actually Menabilly in real life. But Manderley in Rebecca, it almost takes on a character of itself. The house is a part of the plot. So when I was trying to think of a name for my company that would reflect the theme I'd chosen, and that's that buildings, places, cities and landmarks inspired all the titles in the collection, then Manderley seemed like the obvious choice. It united my name, my favourite book, and this idea that houses can take on a life of their own and they can inform writers in really unusual and exciting ways.
They really can. And the selection of your books, I noticed, they are perhaps not the most obvious choices, right? You do look out for, well, can I say forgotten even?
Exactly, yeah. I like to think of them as rediscovered. So in their time, they were very interesting or well-known or well-regarded for one reason or another. And they've sort of just got forgotten about, but not completely. And every now and again, someone will say, have you heard of this wonderful book? And I think, well, I know the author. How have I never heard of this title? And that's really where it all starts.
And where are you based? Is it true? From what I read an article, I believe a year ago, it was in your house. It's in your house.
In my kitchen, yes.
Is it a special house? Is there a nice story to the house?
It is a special house, or I like to think so anyway. So we moved there precisely because we're very interested in old houses. And this one had been lived in by an author. In fact, he commissioned it himself from a quite well-known architect at the time, Philip Webb. And he lived there with his family and he wrote in the downstairs living room. And we know this because we've read his diaries and his letters, which are really entertaining. His novels are quite hard to get into, and I really wish that they were more readable and are relevant to the readers today, but I don't think they are. But his diaries and letters are fascinating, and it does give me a bit of a kick to come downstairs in the morning and see the little alcove where we know that his desk was and where he himself did all his writing.
Perhaps you could give us some of the examples of your upcoming or newer books as well. So I've written down, there's two that I'm interested in, Henry James, Washington Square, and Mary Shelley in Bath as well. I wonder if they could be examples of perhaps of what you do as well.
Well, the Mary Shelley in Bath book is coming out in March. And it's quite interesting because a lot of people know Mary Shelley for her book Frankenstein, or her rather kind of exotic life with Percy Shelley. And sometimes we forget that the real woman behind the story. And I approached a wonderful writer called Fiona Sampson, who's written a great book, a biography of Mary Shelley, and really brings her to life, the drama of her life to life, and asked her if she would be interested in working with me on examining just exactly how important Bath was as a city to her as a writer. And Fiona said, brilliant, I've been wanting to do this for a while. it's been largely unexamined until now, just quite how important and influential Bath was to Mary Shelley. And we now are beginning to wonder, as a result of this book, whether or not Frankenstein was really inspired more by that setting than by any of the other places that traditionally have been associated with the book. So we gathered together all of her letters, her journal entries, and the chapter of Frankenstein that we know she wrote from those diaries while she was in Bath. That's chapter 4. And then we looked at some of the short stories she'd written later in life and really teased out the themes that she'd been experiencing emotionally and socially while she was in Bath, and reflected, therefore, in the stories that came later. It was very interesting to see it all together and suddenly realise quite how much she gained as a writer, as a mother, as a wife-to-be, as a sister-in-law, as a lover. In this tiny city, for just a few months, she experienced incredible upheaval and emotional distress at a very young age. And maybe she channeled that into her writing. And that's what we're excited about looking at in a bit more depth.
Before we talk about Henry James, it's quite interesting. I just realized here that before I watch a film or I read a book, I genuinely care a lot about where is it set, and I think, especially in films, I love when a film is just set inside a house. It could be a murder mystery. It could be that Oscar-nominated film, The Father, which was mainly in his house.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. So I think there's definitely, you're tapping into a market. A lot of people are interested in that, right?
Well, it's something I've been fascinated for all my life. But I think you're right. There's something that you can communicate visually or through the written word that brings to life a story, because people can tangibly imagine that if I touch this wall, then maybe the author touched that wall at the same time when he or she was passing. And I studied history at university, and I found that really the best way for me to reimagine or try to understand or interpret the past was to be in the place where that history happened. So to find books that have been inspired by specific buildings or landmarks, I've got a great one coming out in the summer about the White Horse of Uffington and looking back to the Iron Age to imagine how that might have come into existence. I feel it makes it exciting and relevant to any reader. It doesn't really matter where you're from or whether you're young or old. It's appealing in a universally human way. That's what makes me kind of get up in the morning and want to do it even more.
And I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about Henry James' book, Washington Square.
Well, everybody's heard of Henry James and everyone's heard of Washington Square. And I suppose that, personally, I love New York, so I really wanted to do as many books as possible set there. But there was something about this particular book which really intrigued me, and I think it's to do with Henry James and his connection to the UK. He lived in Lamb House in Rye for a while, which is where Ruma Godden also lived, and she'd written one of the books we've republished. So I felt that he was quite a transatlantic individual, and he was obviously very influenced by his own life and experience and channeled that perhaps cathartically through his work. And so I asked Colin Tobin if he would be interested in looking in more depth at exactly how that building where Henry James grew up on Washington Square, whether or not there were sort of threads that could be unpicked, explaining why he found such profound sadness and emotional drama that he could reveal through a place. I mean, he specifically located it right there in the heart of New York, in a place that everyone can associate, and now iconically with Washington Square and the Arch, which wasn't there when the book was set. But that's the sort of transcends the years, the centuries, and it reveals more about Henry James, the man, or more importantly, Henry James, the boy. And everyone wants to look back to their childhood to try and understand a little bit more about houses or places or literature or films. And this book seemed to be the perfect opportunity to explore all of those aspects. What I really wanted to do was to make it not turgid and staid and boring and sort of old-fashioned. So it was really important to me that it had a brand new cover by someone who really understood the importance of New York as an iconic architectural destination. So I chose very carefully Rose Wong, who she lives in Brooklyn, but she illustrates various things for the New Yorker and New York Times. And she's brought this book to life. I'm absolutely delighted with it. It was very simple but beautiful illustrations, elegant and yet completely contemporary. So I think combined with Conter Bean's introduction, it sort of reimagines this book for 21st century readers. Even if you've never read any Henry James before, it would be a brilliant place to start.
And this is a common trait among your books, the beautiful covers as well. And I think especially when you're talking about a specific house, a specific place, you want to show its beauty so tell us, the cover is a big deal for you,
It's
right?
a really big deal. So throughout my career, I've worked as a bookseller, as an editor, but my main job before the pandemic was a freelance editor for museums and art galleries. That's how I grew up, kind of trying to link art and writing together into a beautiful product that would make people want to pick it up off the shelf and give them an opportunity to discover something new because it was visually appealing. You really do believe that the cover is an extremely important part of a book, and you can judge the inside by the outside. So I wanted to make sure that they were
judge.
I do too. That they needed to be beautiful inside and out. That's something I keep kind of harping on about, but it's very important. So I thought I'll bring these books to life, rediscover them, but give them a new introduction and a new front cover by a writer and an artist with links to the places at the heart of each book. And I think that makes them exciting to see as a range because each one is completely different. But it also brings the story to life in a new way. It's another way to start thinking about the inside of a book and the author's trajectory. And I love the artwork so much. This is on a purely personal basis that I made all of the front covers into art prints and have them for sale on the website, but mainly up on the wall at home. There's something about bringing a book off the shelf and onto the wall to appreciate it as an object as well. That was important to me.
And you mentioned your website, and you also have kind of gift wrapping paper as well, which is beautiful. And it is part, I love, for example, you just gave me a copy here of Tales of London Town, another one of your books, and it came wrapped beautifully. I think it's part of the experience, right?
Well, it's therapeutic for me as well. I call it bibliotherapy. I think I worked it out the other day. I've hand wrapped about 5,000 books in tissue paper, and it's sort of like playing shop. I mean, I used to love doing that as a child, so if you can imagine my desk, it's covered in a rainbow array of silk ribbons, bookmarks, tissue paper, and I have so much fun every day just wrapping up my orders and sending them out with a little note, because I think if a customer has taken the time to order from me direct, then I want to reach out and make a connection with them, and I absolutely love hearing back from people. And more often than not, they enjoy reading the book, but what they really like is getting this little parcel, this present in the post, all wrapped up, especially for them.
It is very special. I mean, of course, when you get a package from Amazon, it is a very different experience, I have to say.
Well, it's hard to sort of carve a niche for yourself as a publisher. I mean, there's some brilliant books, brilliant bookshops, brilliant indie booksellers, and there's room in the market for everyone. In addition to sort of these larger chains like Amazon, but I guess what I wanted to do was offer something a bit more personal. I used to work at Daunt Books just around the corner, actually, and I just popped in.
Another favourite.
I didn't realise quite how lucky I was, sort of the year 2000, to just be working in there and learning how to sell books. It's an art, learning how to listen to what the customer wants, and then offering or suggesting, or even listening to their suggestions. I discovered some of my favourite books from customers' recommendations. So I suppose it's about making yourself a little bit different from the rest. And if that's through tissue paper, ribbons and a little note, then I'm very, very happy to do that.
So be it. What about, do you have a target on how many books do you want to work in a year, or are you working a more organic flow, perhaps?
Well, when I started, it was an experiment, and I thought...
You started during lockdown, right?
Yeah, during lockdown.
Yeah.
All my freelance jobs, exhibition catalogue editing, just stopped when the museums closed. And I had been thinking about doing this for a while, so I thought, okay, it's taken a global pandemic to kick me into action, but let's go for it. And I had a library book at home at the time, which was Edinburgh Picturesque Notes by Robert Louis Stevenson. And so it seemed perfect to start with that one. And in fact, that has been my bestseller ever since. It's reprinted 4 times now, and it just seems to have this living appeal, even though it's over 150 years old. And I just decided to start with that one and see what happened. And it took off. So where it was quite organic at the beginning. Now I've got a bit more of a structure, and I'm limited by the fact it's just me doing the commissioning and editing. I do have someone to help now with sales and marketing and publicity as well, which is absolutely amazing, frees me up to do a bit more. But I think I'm limited to about 6 books a year for the time being. But let's see.
For the time being. And you are flexible in terms of the period these books portray. So we have some classics from the 19th century, but could you do something perhaps very current as well?
It's easier for me to organise buying the rights for something that's out of print. Mm-hmm. Or, I don't know if your listeners will know this, but if an author has been dead for more than 70 years, then their work passes into the public domain. So, sorry, Robert Louis Stevenson, you've been dead for more than 70 years. I don't have to pay you royalties. So, of course, it makes more financial sense to look for books that are really old, but that doesn't necessarily always translate into what I want to do. So, I have done some more contemporary titles, but I haven't yet worked with a living author. And that would be really exciting to do going forward.
Thank you very much, Rebeka. What a pleasure. Do check manderleypress.com for more. And now we head to Paris, the hotspot of the magazine world, with a spotlight on 16 World and 16 Journal, a biannual publication offering an intriguing blend of fine art, cultural and fashion photography. Monocle writer Anton Proulx sits down with Xavier Encinas, founder and editor-in-chief, about the curation of the various photographs and the conversations he aims to create when artfully fusing the works of emerging talents and established masters like Jack Davison, Todd Hido, and Shelby Lee Adams.
So 16 is a biannual photography, fashion, and documentary magazine. We are based in Paris. And the concept of the magazine is that it's a little bit unusual in regards of the other publication out there, is that all the content is mixed. The idea was to create like a Japanese book where all the images will be mixed together, full bleed, and all the stories that we commission, all the archives that we acquire, we recreate conversation between the images.
Wow, interesting. You already mentioned it, that the magazine covers a wide range of themes and imagery. When it comes to these themes and specific images, how do you go about selecting what goes in?
So each theme it's very personal to us, and it usually starts with the archives. So we have an idea of a theme. So for example, I can speak about volume number 10, which was sports, which we released last year. And I really wanted to publish Walter East Jr. Images, which is one of the most famous American sports photographer. He, for almost like 40 years, he shot all the cover of Sports Illustrated. So we start from there and we approach those artists, as very, established artists. And then from there, if we able to have a conversation with them and they want to be part of this journey, then this is kind of just the base of how we're going to construct the rest of the content of the issue, meaning commissioning documentary stories on the theme and fashion as well.
Interesting. Where did the idea originally come from? What inspired you to start something like this, 16 World?
I was living in London, that was 2016. And I would say that my career has been mainly working in magazine. I started my career at Self-Service Magazine. When I was in London, I worked at Dazed, and I also worked as, creative agency as an art director. So I saw a lot of, different publication, learned from, great editor-in-chiefs such as Ezra Petronio and Jefferson Hack. This started kind of form my own idea of what I wanted to do for a publication. And I think it just started with wanting to do something radically different. At first, it was just, calling a few friends and putting a small zine publication, 16 pages together, not selling it, just give it to, key people in the industry in London, in Paris, in New York, sending it out and see how it would feel. And then it kind of picked up. So we did that for 3 issues, which kind of lasted like 4 or 5 years. And then after that, which comes volume 4, which became really a magazine. We tested the idea of would that work on 300 pages? And that was right up when the COVID happened. Everything, stopped. And that's when we decided, well, we're not bound by anything. So why don't we just jump right in and see how it works? And I think it was different publication at the right time, and I think it appealed to a lot of people. It appealed to photography lovers, for creative in the industry that want to have a piece of inspiration for their own creative. And I think that's kind of where we sit.
You already mentioned it's a biannual issue. Where can we find it?
Everywhere in the world, in Paris, London, New York, and everywhere, and in museums, in selected bookstores.
Great. You talked a little bit about your work next to the magazine already, your studio. If I understand that right, you have a consultancy for brands, creating campaigns as well as creative direction, right? Tell me a bit more about the dichotomy of your work and your magazine. How does your work relate to the magazine?
Well, 16 is a laboratory. So it's a place where, it allows me to collaborate on a very different level with, creative photographers, stylists than, I would have on a commercial job, for example. And it's a very unique place because it allows them to be, I would say, a lot more creative because there's a lot more freedom than a commercial job. But it's also a place where it allows to, build a relationship. And then, those relationships translate into a commercial work. It may not translate directly of what you see in the magazine, what you would see in the commercial clients that I have, but it certainly translates into the collaboration and the relationships we have.
Interesting. The issue you have now available, the latest issue, is number 11. What are you excited about for future projects regarding, any possible artists, photographers you want to feature?
Volume 11 came out last year in October. And the upcoming issue is coming out in April, which will be volume 12. And I can't really release the theme yet, but we're very excited. It's probably one of our biggest issues yet. Not necessarily in terms of pages, but in terms of collaborators and the theme we approach. And we're very, very excited.
Thank you, Xavier, from 16 Word there. Volume 11 of 16 Journal is out now. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks as ever to our editor, Jack Dewars. Any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fb@monocle.com. We're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, monocle.com, of course, or YouTube as well. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.